The diary of a saintly woman held tales of such smouldering desire it could burn the fingers that dared to turn its pages. In this chapter, I peel back the delicate layers of my mother's past, each entry a revelation more shocking than the last. My name is Emily, and I stand at the precipice of a past painted with the brushstrokes of an illicit affair that scorches the present. What began as a quest for truth morphs into a journey through a hidden life where love and passion are the ink that writes history. As I confront these revelations, I invite you to witness a portrait of love that defies the bounds of convention. Chapter 2. My mother's hidden romance, the steamy affair that shocked me. Who would have thought that the very fabric of my existence was woven with threads of deception? Last night's revelations left me restless, tossing and turning in the bed I shared with Mark. The man whose steady breathing now sounded to me like the hush of secrets. It's said that the morning brings clarity, but all it brought me was a relentless storm of confusion. The man in the photograph, the artist, was he my... No, I couldn't even bring myself to think it. Not yet. It was too preposterous, too much like the plot of one of those novels I edited for a living, filled with torrid affairs and impossible coincidences. The house was silent as I made my way downstairs, the first rays of dawn casting long, sombre shadows across the kitchen. Mark was already gone, likely retreated to the sanctuary of his study, that place where I now suspected he kept secrets of his own. I sat at the kitchen table, the diary laying open before me, its pages a testament to a woman I realized I never truly knew. My mother. The woman who had penned these words was full of passion, of longing, of a desperation to be seen and to be loved for who she truly was. She spoke of her love for the artist with a fervour that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. They had met in secret, in the shade of the old willow by the river, in the quiet corners of the village fete, in the attic where I now sat, a silent witness to the aftermath of their forbidden love. The entries were sporadic, written in bursts of emotion that left my hands trembling as I read. Each meeting was described with a tenderness and an intensity that left little to the imagination. Their affair was not just a meeting of bodies, but of souls, a connection so profound that it transcended the ordinary life she led with my father. She wrote of the first time they made love, under the stars, the night air around them alive with the electricity of their touch. It was poetic, almost too much so, the way she described the feeling of his hands tracing the curves of her body, his lips whispering promises against her skin, the sweet pressure of him moving with a rhythm that matched the beating of her heart. I had to stop reading several times, my cheeks flushed, not just with the second-hand heat of my mother's affair, but with a mixture of shame and sorrow. Shame, because I felt like an intruder in her private world, and sorrow, because I saw the reflection of my own unspoken desires in her words. She never named the artist, referring to him only as her soul's muse and her heart's capture. She knew their love was a ticking time bomb, set to detonate the moment it was brought into the light. And yet, she couldn't stay away. I understood that pull, the allure of something, or someone, that promised escape from the drudgery of everyday life. I could hear Mark moving about upstairs, the floorboards creaking under the weight of his steps, each creak a reminder of the reality I was trying to escape. I had to confront him, but first I needed to understand the depth of my mother's deception. The diary ended abruptly, with a final entry that was more a cry of despair than a goodbye. "I have to end this," she wrote. "For the sake of my family, for my children, I must say goodbye to my heart." It was dated just a week before I was born. The realization hit me like a slap to the face. Could it be possible? The timing, the secrecy. Was the artist... My train of thought was interrupted by the sound of the study door opening and Mark's footsteps descending the stairs. I quickly closed the diary and tucked it away, my heart racing with a fear I couldn't name. "Morning, love," Mark said, his voice a balm to my frayed nerves. But I could see it in his eyes, that flicker of something hidden. He knew something about the letter, about my mother, something he wasn't telling me. "Mark," I began, my voice steady despite the chaos raging inside me. "We need to talk." The words hung between us, an invitation to a conversation that would unearth the secrets we both kept. But would we have the courage to face them? The kettle whistled, a shrill sound that pierced the tense silence. I stood up, my legs shaky, my resolve firm. It was time to uncover the truth, no matter how steamy or scandalous it might be. Today, I would demand answers. But as I reached for the teapot, my hand froze. The letter, the diary. They weren't just whispers of the past. They were echoes of my present, of a marriage that might have been built on the very lies I was so desperate to uncover. And the question that haunted me as I poured the boiling water over the tea leaves, watching them swirl and settle, was not just one of heritage or scandal, but of love. What was love, if not a leap of faith into the unknown? A trust that the person you chose to give your heart to would keep it safe, even when the world turned upside down. As the steam rose from the teapot, curling into the air like spirits of the past, I braced myself. I was about to leap, and the ground beneath me was anything but solid.